Okay. I have an unofficial account here for our cans. It has not been counted by the official counting committee chairman, but you guys are awesome and horrible at the same time, because we have unofficially, I'm going to emphasize that, 1,012 cans. Nicely done. So Sam, the amazing guy that he is, said he'll take 2 pies to the face for that amount. Not really, but he did send me a message this morning and say, I'll take the pie to the face, so I'm going to let him. So you're quite a guy, Sam. I told you I'd call you out on that. Anyways, no, it's great to be here this morning. So last week we sort of started off this series in which we're looking at why we're doing the things that we do when we gather here. We started it off 2 weeks ago with it's all because of God. It's all because of His greatness and how amazing He truly is. And then last week we started diving into the actual things that we did. And we looked at the very beginning, kind of like what Gene was talking about. Every week we gather and we partake in what we call communion or the Lord's Supper. And the reason we do that is because it is a response. It's a response in what Jesus has done for us. And I love the way that Gene always presents it. He always really directs us to why are we doing this. And I'll tell you, it helped me this week. Just remembering back to last sermon, so if nobody else got anything out of it, again, I spoke to myself, and so I'm good at speaking to myself pretty well. It happens all the time. God spoke to me, though. And there were times where it was like, oh, this temptation is entering into my mind, or this temptation to actually act upon something that is undesiring to God, that breaks the heart of God. And I'll tell you, I always went back to, no, Jesus died to free me from this. I am now set apart because of what Jesus did. And so it served as a great reminder, not just Sunday morning, but through the week to me, that I am victorious because Jesus was victorious so many years ago, and that we are now set free from this. But again, I talked about it because it's easy to come into it, and I tried doing it again this morning, where it's just like I'm going to take the bread, I'm going to take the juice, I'm going to do it, and then I'm going to think about something else, and I'm not really going to focus on why am I taking part in this. I'm going to take it, and then I'm going to pass it along. And so that's the purpose of this whole little series that we're going through, is to try and keep us from making things tradition. Even though we do them weekly, let's not let it become a tradition or a habit or something that we just do and then we forget about the reason that we do it. It's kind of like what James says, where we need to not only be hearers of the word, but doers, and we not need to be like the man who looks at his face in the mirror, leaves, and then totally forgets what he looks like. We should not do that with the reason that we come here. It shouldn't be like, well, I'm coming and I just took part in communion or the Lord's Supper, and now I totally forgot why. I totally forgot that I just took part in that. It's all because of what Jesus did, and we need to constantly remind ourselves about that. And like Tom always talks about whenever he prepares us for that with the song, he always tells us, and I mentioned it also, that it is inclusively exclusive. It is open for everybody to come and take part of it, but he really does a good job of emphasizing, please, if you have not given your life over to Jesus, please don't take part of it. Please just pass it along. There's no harm in just passing it by, because it is a very serious thing as well. It's not just something that we do. It is very important and sacred to us. And we don't have to just take communion on Sunday mornings. We don't just have to take it here in this building. I got sent a video, I think it was back in January was when I was actually sent it, but it was of this church in China, and I actually have the video for everybody, and I clipped it down to just a little bit. Do we have that? Did I actually put that in there? Hey, there we go. And their door to their building just got locked. Sorry, wasn't expecting audio with it as well. But yeah, their door just got locked. They just got said, you can no longer gather in this building to worship. And they said, hey, we don't worship in a place, we worship as a people. And so they are outside their church, and they are still remembering this is the sacrifice that Jesus has done. And it made me wonder. I saw another photo this morning that a friend sent, and it was this church in the Philippines, and they've been flooded. And I mean, you saw a picture of everybody standing there, and it was like something's off in that picture. Nobody has feet. And then you realize the floor is water. That they are all standing in knee-high water, singing praises and taking part as bodies and believers in Jesus. And it was like, man, that is awesome. They're not going to let a little flood stop them from gathering together to worship. They are going to come together because they realize the importance of gathering, and they realize why they come together. And I thought, man, I know we're kind of landlocked here in Columbus, but I hope that if this church is flooded, we still say, hey, church is flooded, service starts at 10:30, bring your waiters. We're going to be there. We're going to still meet because God is worth it, and this is so important to us. We're not just going to pass it by. But we looked at last week and it was a response of what we did. It was a response to not what we did, it was a response to what Jesus did. And so this week, we're going to be talking about tithes and offerings. And it's funny because I went to Ryan Lason's Sunday school class, and I think she stole my notes because her entire Sunday school was on this very topic. So if you were in that class, you know what I'm talking about already. She pretty much said it verbatim. It's like, you're a thief, Ryan. I don't know where she's at. She's up there. Yeah, she stole my notes. But anyways, we're talking about tithes and offerings because communion is a response that we do to what Jesus has done. And I was trying to think about, is tithe and offering a response? Or is it before something? Do we do it in anticipation of something? So do we give to the church? Do we give to God out of a response or out of anticipation of something else? And my answer to the question is both. I think it is a response, but I think it is also in anticipation. And so I'll explain this. I believe, first off, it is a response because everything we have is from God. It's important to remember that. God has blessed us beyond measure. We talked about it when we looked at the Sermon on the Mount. The average person in the world makes $2 a day. The average person in America, even if you make minimum wage, I think it's $7.75. So the average person in America is making at least $7.75 an hour, not a day. I know some states just went up to $17 an hour. So the average person in America makes far beyond what the average person in the world makes in one day. We spend more on a caramel frappuccino from Starbucks than most people spend on food in their entire week. And so we are blessed beyond measure. And even if we don't have anything, even if we don't have what we consider anything, we are still blessed beyond measure. In America, we consider it difficult times if we have to shut off the internet, if we lose cable or ESPN, or if we have to get rid of some luxury, where there are people who are living in cardboard boxes overseas, where there are people who are eating mud because they have nothing else to eat. And I'm not trying to condemn anybody who is thinking, man, it's tough times, I'm going to have to pinch my pennies right now, but I'm trying to point out you are still blessed. God has still blessed you. Even if you had no money in the world, you are still blessed. God has still given you so much. And everything is a blessing from God, and therefore everything rightfully belongs to God. And as a Christian, this is where our perspective needs to be. So often I find myself doing this. It becomes I need, I want, I have, I own. It's mine, mine, mine. It's like the penguins on the Madagascar movie. Nope, not Madagascar. I think it's Finding Nemo. My childhood movies are going blurry. But they're like, mine, mine, mine. They want it. It's all about them. It all belongs to us. And so we get into that mindset. And I'm that way. I want a new boat. I got a boat. I'm trying to sell it. I want new guns. I want a bigger truck. I want a new house. I want a new whatever. More. I want. And in this desire for more stuff, we can easily make it become more and more about the stuff. We can make it become more about what I want. What's the next thing I can buy? What's the next thing that I need? Well, we really don't need any of this stuff. And I don't believe there is anything wrong with having nice things, but I do believe there is something wrong when our perspective turns to the nice things over God. When it turns to, how is this going to bless me? How is this going to bring satisfaction to me? How am I going to enjoy this? Instead of, God, how can I glorify you with this? God, how can I use this to further your kingdom? God, how can I use this to draw me closer to you? And I heard a story. It was about this pastor that I really enjoy in Colorado. He shared this story about himself, and he was at a gas station, and he was filling up with gas, and he looks over at the building, and he sees that there is the lottery going on, and it's $40 million. And so from the time he starts pumping to the time he stops, he has this conversation with God. And he says, God, if you let me win the lottery, if I can win that $40 million, just let it blow up, the winning numbers, right to me. I'll pick it up, turn it in. Winning numbers, God, if I win the lottery, I will give you $30 million. I'll keep $10 million. You can have $30 million. And then he did what everybody starts to do. He started to rationalize. Well, God, if I give you $30 million, that only leaves me 10. I can't buy a helicopter and a boat and a mansion and all this stuff. So God, actually, that's too much money. Let's go 50-50. You take 20, I'll take 20. Well, but God, if I give you 20, that's still a little, you only ask for 10, God, 10%. So I'll give you more than 10. I'll give you 25. I'll give you $10 million. But if I give the church $10 million, they're going to be so rich, nobody's going to think that they have to tithe anymore. And therefore, I'm going to be a bad spiritual leader, so I'm not going to give money that much because then nobody else will feel the need to participate. So therefore, God, I will give you God, I'll give you $100,000 if you let me win $40 million. And he worked his way down to that. And he said, no lie, he turned on his car, he found a podcast of some pastor that he enjoys, and the pastor started out by saying, if God were to let you win the lottery, how much money would you give back to him? And he was like, ouch. Because I just agreed to give God 0.25%. That is how much he thinks God is worth if he were to win that much money. And so we need to see a perspective that it is all about God, that it all is his. And that's where we're called to tithe, to give this tenth. Tithe literally means a tenth, a 10% of what we have. And we first see that the tithe happens in Genesis, where Abraham, he's on a mission to recapture his cousin Lot. And he goes and he fights his name is the Chedorlaomer king. I call him the Cheddar King. But he fights the Cheddar King, and he wins. And he takes all the plunder, and he returns. And he gets his nephew, and he comes back. And as he's returning, Melchizedek, who is the king of Salem, and also the high priest, comes out to him, and he blesses Abram. And he gives him bread, and he gives him wine. And in response to this, Abram gives Melchizedek 1/10 of everything that he had. And so we see this is the first recorded instance of giving a tithe. And now we fast forward, and the descendants of Abraham have become the nation of Israel, and God gives them laws that they are to live by. And in these laws, he tells them, you are to give a tithe. This is found in Leviticus chapter 27, and it's the last law in the book. You are to give a tithe. 1/10 of everything the land produces goes to God. So the Jews are commanded to give 1/10 of everything they own to God. So it's a command. Give 1/10 to God. But why is it important to do this? Why are we being told to give it to God? And God tells us in Leviticus, 1/10 is holy. Set it apart. Because it is sacred, it is holy, set apart for God. Intentionally doing this with the mindset, God, I am giving this to you. And I think Jesus answers this question in the Sermon on the Mount, where he addresses the issue of money. And he knew that there's going to be this battle in our lives for trust. What are we going to trust? Are we going to trust our money, or are we going to trust God? Because it all pretty much comes down to those two things, it seems. And he knew this. And he tells us in Matthew 6:24, he says, no one can serve two masters. Either he will hate the one and love the other, or he will be devoted to the one and despise the other. He says you cannot serve both God and money. It's not possible. And so this is what it comes down to. Trust. Are we going to trust God? Are we going to give it to God and say, God, I'm giving this to you. I trust you are going to do what you say. Because let's all be honest here. Maybe everybody's hit financial difficulties at some point in your life where you have to make decisions and something has to go. I know in my personal life, the first thing I think, well, this month I'm not going to do is tithe. Before I get rid of internet, before I get rid of, I don't have anything else, internet, it's before I get rid of eating out, it's, well, I just won't tithe this week, or I won't tithe this month. God still forgives me. God will still love me. That is where my mind always goes to. I see my bank account dip pretty low, and it's like, oh no. I start getting worried. Even though I was sporadic in my spending. I'm the reason. I know what my bills are. I just spend a lot more money than what I make. And I think, well, I'll just get rid of the tithe. That is the one area I can kind of mess around with. And it is the wrong mindset because I'm thinking, God, I don't trust you to provide for me. But we're called to give back to God what is already His. And we're called to do it in trust. And this is one area where God, He even commands us, test me in this. See if I don't rain down blessings on you. Malachi 3:10, he says, bring the whole tenth into the storehouse, so that there may be food in my house. Test me in this, says the Lord of hosts, if I will not open for you the windows of heaven and pour out for you a blessing until it overflows. And so God says, test me. See if I will not bless you for being generous, for giving, for trusting. And I love that it says, I will open for you the windows of heaven. And I just picture it like that teenager's room where when you say, hey, go clean your room, everything is shoved into the closet. And then it's like, did you clean your room yet? And so they go and open the closet and it all just pours out. Except without it being a teenager's junk, it is blessings from God. And it's just like He is wanting it to just flood into our lives if we are willing to trust Him. And I've seen this in my personal life. I've seen where this has happened because I've mentioned it before. I used to work a job where I only made $10,000 a year, and I was graduated. I was trying to live on my own, and I only made $10,000 a year. And I had a degree that could have made me 3 times that much money. And so I started rationalizing with all of this. It was like, God, you are only blessing me with $10,000, which is the very wrong mindset. But it's like, God, you gave me this job only $10,000. I could be making $30,000. In essence, God, I am giving you $20,000 because I am doing your work where you called me. I could be making all this money, but I'm only making 10. So God, pretty much, your tithe is $20,000. I'm even better than everybody else because I'm giving way more. I'm not just giving a tenth, I'm giving like 66%. And I rationalized it, but I realized that is a poor excuse because there's no trust in that. It's like I'm living off my $10,000. God, you can have what I'm not actually making and I'm not having to sacrifice. There's no faith, there's no trust. And so I would decide to intentionally give. It's like, God, you have called me. You have commanded me to give and to give in faith and in obedience. And so I would do that because I believed in the promise. I trusted God, and God is faithful in all of His promises. And God promises to bless those who give. And I would see when I would give it to God, He would bless me in return. And it would just be like, oh my goodness. This is amazing. God, you're actually doing what you said you would do. And I feel like God would be like, yeah, told you. I am doing what I said I would do. I always do what I said I would do. But then again, that sporadic spending would come. And I'd work my bank account down. And it'd be like, oh, I got to cut something out. All right, tithing. There it goes. And then it'd be like, God would work on my heart, and it'd be like, no, I have to give. And then once I'd start giving again, God would bless me again. And the blessing is not always financially. Don't get in your head that if I give $10,000, God's going to return $30,000 to me. The blessing is not always financially, but the blessing always comes. But the question that has constantly been in my life in all these times is, am I going to trust God? Or am I going to trust my money? Am I going to keep trusting my financial status, which could disappear at any time? Or am I going to trust God, who is always faithful? And I got to thinking, how great is it when we are able to give to God the very thing that is battling for our trust? The very thing that we might want to make an idol, we say, no, I'm not going to worship this. Instead, I'm going to give it to the one that I worship. This is the thing that could interfere with my relationship with Jesus, but instead, I'm going to gladly, faithfully give it to God. Because when we're able to give the very thing that is fighting for priority in our lives, that's when we say to God, you are first. You are the one I want to trust. You are the one I want to obey and worship. It's not wealth. It's not my possessions. It's not my job. God, it's you and you only. And so in doing this, we give God the first. We don't give God the leftover. It's not like I wait until I find out if all the ends are going to meet, and then God, you can have a tenth of whatever is left. But instead, we give in anticipation. This is where I believe it's a response because God has given us everything, but then we give in anticipation that God is going to bless us. He has promised it. And so it's not out of our excess, it's out of the very beginning. First thing, right away, 10%, that's going to God. Because if I give him out of my excess, where is the faith? Well, I got a couple extra dollars, God, you can have it. Now that I know I'm able to make ends meet. No, we give right away at the beginning in anticipation that God is going to return. Proverbs tells us that we are to honor God in this way. Because he, like Malachi, says, blessings will rain down on us. He says, honor the Lord with your wealth and from the first of all your produce. Not the last, not the leftover, the first of all your produce. And he says, so your barns will be filled with plenty and your vats will overflow with new wine. So we give out of trust. We give out obedience. And we do this in anticipation. But I also got to thinking that this is also out of a response to what God has done as well. Because what is it that God has held back from us? This is where the response comes in. Has God held anything back from us? Has God said, I'm not going to give you that, I'm just going to give you a little bit? No. We looked at last week. Jesus shed every ounce of blood he had for us. He gave it all for us. He did not hold back one thing. And yet we think, well, I'm going to hold back a little bit. I'm going to keep a little extra because I don't trust that God really has my best intention in mind. When you get to thinking about that, look back at why we take the Lord's Supper. And you'll see God holds nothing back. And so in response to that, Jesus wants everything. And I see a problem that can arise. Because when we give to God, it feels good. It's like, I put my check in there. They're going to see how much money I give. These are temptations that can happen. They're going to see the amount that I give. I'm going to let people know. The Pharisees had this problem. They wanted it to clink in the jar so people knew they were giving. And it feels good. I've done my religious duty. But we can make it begin to feel like it is a work. God, you're gonna love me because of how much money I gave. God, you gotta forgive me because I'm the reason that church has electricity. God, you gotta, whatever it is, we feel like we can buy God's love by the amount of money. The Pharisees did. They gave arrogantly. They thought it is what made them right with God. They stood in the presence and said, thank you, God, that I'm not like that poor beggar, but I'm able to give you in excess. I get to give you a lot. They gave you just nothing pretty much. And it is so easy for us to become like the Pharisees. And I've heard in podcasts that I've listened to, people in other churches, and they've said, hey, if you're going to play music like that, we're not going to give money to the church anymore. Hey, if you're going to have pews instead of chairs, we're going to pull our tithe. We're not going to pay you guys anymore. And it's like, do you think you can buy the church? Do you think that you can buy power? That's not why you give. Your giving is not buying the church. It's not buying power. Your giving is in obedience to God. God doesn't want you to give so that you can have a better status in the church. God wants you to give so that you can have faith and trust in him. King Saul, he got in the habit of thinking that his sacrifice conquered obedience, because he had just conquered Amalek, and he was commanded by God in 1 Samuel, destroy everything. Keep not a single thing. And Saul thought, well, I'll keep the best sheep, the best goats, the best bulls. I'll keep it all, and I will give it to God. And when Samuel asked God, why didn't he obey? Saul's response was, I did obey. And I went on the mission on which the Lord sent me. And I've brought back Agag, the king of Amalek, and I've destroyed everybody else. I've destroyed the Amalekites. But the people took some of the spoil, sheep and oxen, and the choices of things devoted to the destruction, to sacrifice to the Lord, your God, at Gilgal. The reason we kept it was for God. He should understand we're going to sacrifice to him. Doesn't God desire sacrifice? I mean, I could have destroyed it, but we really wanted it to be a blessing to God. And Samuel's response in verse 22, has the Lord as much delight in burnt offerings and sacrifices as in obeying the voice of the Lord? Behold, to obey is better than sacrifice, and to heed than the fat of rams. And we see again in the book of Amos, God, he is mad with the Israelites because they are not fully obeying God. They are moving the place of worship from Jerusalem to Bethel and Gilgal, and God's not happy with them. And they're not fully obeying God. They're doing what they think God's wanting them to do. They're worshiping, they're sacrificing, they're doing all of that, but it is not completely to the standard of God. And the law was that there had to be a tithe, a certain tithe brought every 3 years. And God even tells them, you can bring that tithe every 3 days. It is not going to satisfy me. It will not appeal to me because you are living in disobedience. And so God tells them they love this form of worship. It makes them feel good. They get to thinking, boy, aren't we great? We give not once every 3 years. We give once every 3 days. We're not only doing what God asked, we are going above and beyond. But their heart was in the wrong place. And they were assuming that their tithing and their giving covered up for all the other wrongdoing that they were doing. And we cannot think that our tithing covers up for every other sin we want to commit. David Guzik, he said this, the children of Israel loved their corrupted worship. It was disobedient both in heart and action, but they loved it. It's always wrong to measure worship by how it pleases us, because it is possible for corrupt and disobedient worship to be wonderfully pleasing. The point is that we don't first measure worship by how it makes us feel. We measure it by how it honors God. And the people of Israel, they were not honoring God in their giving. Jesus, he echoed this in Matthew 23:23, where he's giving those 8 woes to Pharisees, and they're thinking, we are so great because we are giving so much, but they miss out on the heart of God. He says, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, for you tithe mint and dill and cumin, but you've neglected the weightier provisions of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. But these are the things you should have done without neglecting the others. And so their focus turned to their giving instead of to what they were doing, instead of how they were living. And so we give generously, and we give with a pure heart, but we do not get caught up in thinking it is the primary importance and miss out on everything else God is calling us to do. He is calling us to do so much more. So yes, we do give, we tithe, we give offering, because it is something that God commanded us out of our wealth, and it shows that we are trusting God, that he is going to bring a blessing on us for obediently following him. But we cannot think that this giving 10% is all. That just giving 10%, I've done my part, I'm checking that little God, I gotcha box, and now I have nothing else to do. Because it's all God's anyways. And he wants us to be generous in all our giving. And when you look at the actions of the first church, it astounds me. Because they sold everything they had to give to the poor. It wasn't like, well, I gave 10%. It was like, no, I have a house, I'm going to sell that house, and I'm going to give my proceeds to the poor. And we see in Acts 2, this happens. That they are making everything common among themselves. They were going above and beyond. They didn't think, I'll just give 10%. They thought, God, whatever you're calling me to give, I'm going to give. I'm going to faithfully trust you because it's all yours. You want me to give my camel? I'll give my camel. You want me to give my house? I'll give my house. You want me to give the coat off my back? I will give the coat off my back. I will give it all. And we see that because of their generosity, thousands were being added to their number by day. It was being noticed because they weren't just saying, oh, we have this faith in God, but I got to hold back because I don't trust that God's actually going to provide for me. But they said, we have this faith in God, and we are going to live it out to its fullest. They were showing, it isn't my possessions that I trust, it is the God that I serve that I trust. And the people saw this. They saw that the church was actually living out what the church was preaching. They were actually doing what they were saying they believed. And they saw that all of it had already belonged to God. And this is what we need to realize again. It is important. God doesn't just desire our possessions, though. It's all his. But he doesn't ask for us to just give him stuff. He asks for us to give him everything. He desires for us to give him us. Not just money, but our lives. He desires our time. He desires our hearts. Jesus told a parable about a great feast, and this wasn't your little backyard grill out or backyard cookout. It was like one of those things where it's like, we do not want to miss this. This is going to be the biggest thing of all time. If you're not there, you're going to miss out. So everybody should be there. But as the invites go out, the responses start to come back. And we see excuse after excuse, and it's found in Luke 14. And one man, he said, I just bought a piece of land, and I need to go, and I need to look at it. And then another one said, I have bought 5 yoke of oxen, and I'm gonna try them out. I won't be able to make it. And then another said, I'm just married, and for that reason I cannot come. And so each one, they had a reason for why they were not going, for why they were holding something back. And we can all make excuses as to why we are not going to give God everything. Well, I just don't trust. Well, I need to keep it back for myself or for a rainy day or whatever. But God calls for us to give him everything. Money, talents, time, energy, effort. God calls for us to be holy. He says, no longer is the 10th holy, you are holy. You set your lives apart. You set yourselves apart from everything else for me. And we're told multiple times in the Bible to give God our wealth, because that is what's going to battle for our trust. That is what we're going to try and rely on, that we're going to go back to. That we think, even if God fails me, this will hold up. Your money will fail you before God will fail you, because God will never fail you. And so in response to what Christ gave, which is everything, he says, give me back everything. Give me your lives. Give me your time. Give me your talents. Give me everything. And so the question is, what are you holding back from God? Is it that you're in a time of financial crisis and it's been like, we need to cut back our giving. We can't be so generous because we are what is important and we don't know if God's going to actually be faithful. Or is it maybe your efforts where it's like, well, I really feel like God is calling me into this service and God is calling me to give up this, but really this is what I like. I enjoy my free time. I enjoy my hobbies and I can't give that up. And so I'll just say no to God in this area. I don't trust that God will bless me if I follow him in that direction. whatever it is that God is calling you to give up, trust that He will bless you. Trust that He wants what's best for you and that He has a plan. And let us hold nothing back. So let us not just come and say, well, I'll give my 10% and call it good. That's the tithe. Now we offer our bodies and our lives as holy and sacred to God. That is our offering. That is the true form of worship. Let's pray. Father God, I thank you so much that you have held nothing back from us. Even when we question if you are holding some good back, God, that is a lie from the pit of hell. And so, God, may we as a body of believers, may we as individuals, may we just say, God, you have all of us. You have my whole being. Whatever you ask for, God, it's yours.